One of the glaring ironies of the last year and a half is the instant morphing of yesterday's frontline heroes into today's expendable villains. Teachers, first responders, healthcare workers, they all put their lives on the line to save yours, we were constantly reminded, until suddenly the quality of their lives became a lot less important, or at least the quality of their livelihoods specifically, which have been threatened, terminated, or supposedly left voluntarily, despite coercive terms ahead of that departure. It's one of the under-discussed pieces of the current economic chaos. It's not just that jobs aren't being created at a strong pace, it's that jobs are being quit at a strong pace, at a record pace in August. In fact, 4.3 million Americans quit their jobs in just that month alone. About an eighth of them specifically, your former frontline healthcare heroes. Teachers are also on the way out, with many states experiencing shortages and difficulty finding substitutes. Police officers are also leaving the beat. Data from earlier in the year indicate retirements are up 45%. And resignations up 18% from the year prior. And the typical explanations for this trend are often trying to portray it as rosier than it is, and avoid mentioning significant factors likely driving it. Oh, people are leaving these jobs because they just can't handle the stress of the danger of the virus. If so, why did these people last through the worst of it and then quit as the virus waned? Oh, well, these workers are just quitting their jobs because they're empowered by new leverage to get a better job elsewhere. If so, why do we have the lowest labor force participation in 4 decades? Shouldn't all that leverage attract people to jump into the workforce and cash in? Very rarely is the obvious factor even mentioned in much of this reporting. Vaccine mandates forcing people to leave their jobs. Instead, we just get non-specific language like changing labor dynamics and health concerns unique to the pandemic circumstances. Apparently, it's all just coincidence that right as we've started coercing people to take this shot, all the problems that have been present this entire time suddenly and drastically worsened. And those questions, as important as they are still secondary in importance to the one that's at the heart of the entire premise here. In what sort of so-called emergency can you fire emergency workers? Just how bad or not bad is this emergency if we can afford not just to let these emergency workers go, but in many cases to force them to go through coercion? If these workers have all the leverage, then why is the leverage being exerted against them rather than for them? This is the trend in play in Chicago, where Mayor Lori Lightfoot is in the middle of a battle with the city's police force, imposing a mandate on them that police officers must disclose their vaccination status to the city. This mandate went into effect Friday morning at midnight. Unvaccinated officers must either get vaccinated or submit to weekly testing, and failure to disclose vaccination status will result in an officer being placed on unpaid leave. And there are 2 purported justifications for this policy. CNN's reporting emphasizes that such a mandate protects the officers themselves because, after all, at least 228 cops have died from coronavirus this year. It's the leading cause of death for police. Number one, that's if you believe the data as presented. I browsed through their list of officers allegedly fallen to COVID, and I'm no doctor or coroner, of course, but given the images, I would speculate there may have been some compounding factors in play. A lot of these guys look like the sort who give the donut eater stereotype some legitimacy. But number 2, even if you do buy the data, the risk to that police officer is that police officer's personal assessment to make. If you're so concerned with personal safety, not being a Chicago police officer in the first place is a more effective way to achieve it. Lori Lightfoot emphasizes this move is not just to protect police, though. It's to protect the city. It's to keep the city safe. But no matter your view on the risks of the virus, fewer police officers on the streets of Chicago is in no plausible way a means to keep the city safe. Chicago murders are on record pace this year. And of course, they weren't starting far behind the pace of other cities to begin with. Police response times are dragging, and that's if the phone even gets answered when you call. Chicago police met their goal for just answering the phone only 38% of the time, records from over the summer show. Business leaders warn that even as consumer confidence in the face of the virus improves, shoppers won't return and business won't recover if crime is not controlled. Letting cops go to keep the city safe only makes sense if you accept the premise that the virus is a greater threat to the city than crime is. If you believe that, Consider this stat. More children have been shot in Chicago this year than have died from the virus across the entire country in that time frame. More children have been fatally shot in Chicago this year than have died from the virus in the entire state of Illinois. Besides, if you're calling police for help, you've already made your own personal risk assessment. If someone's robbing you or holding you at gunpoint or otherwise trying to kill you, I bet you'd rather have an unvaccinated officer come to help you than no officer at all. Because after all, if you chose the no officer option, you never would have made the call in the first place. Not to mention, you have had months at this point to protect yourself from the dangers of an unvaccinated cop by taking the vaccine yourself anytime you want. And of course, this controversy is being presented as an issue of vaccine true believers versus anti-vax kooks. It isn't. It's a fight about consent and privacy. The police union president, John Catanzara, isn't calling for officer non-compliance because he's anti-vaccine. He's doing it because he views this order as a violation of an officer's right to choose medical treatment for himself and to have those choices remain private.
I've made my status very clear as far as the vaccine, but I do not believe the city has the authority to mandate that to anybody, let alone that information about your medical history, and change the terms of employment, so to speak, on the fly, and you have to comply.
And in response, Lori Lightfoot says, what else? That guy's a racist. John Catanzara says a lot of things, she says. A lot of it is offensive and racist and foolish, but we'll see what happens. We'll be prepared for any eventuality, she says. As though if he once said the N-word, his entire argument is invalid. Besides, I noticed Lori Lightfoot has done some racist things in her tenure. I'm not sure why those things don't similarly invalidate her stance on this issue. But whether the union president has a point, or whether Lori Lightfoot has none, or whether Chicago cops are simply making their own choices for entirely their own reasons, it would appear that Chicago police compliance with Lightfoot's disclosure mandate is going very poorly. Estimates for how many officers are vaccinated are something around a third having at least one dose. And of course, just because an officer has taken the vaccine doesn't mean that he'll disclose that information to the city. As Catanzara notes, if they had the compliance in that reporting, the city wouldn't be harassing their police officers about it.
The simple fact that they keep putting out public statements, emails, and having bosses call you means one thing. Our members are holding the line. Officers from all ranks are not going into that portal. They clearly must have a very, very low cooperation level, which is good. It's information they shouldn't be entitled to.
Catanzara estimates that enforcement of this disclosure mandate would have pulled up to half the city's police force off the streets this weekend. But in another indicator that the city's position is weak, that enforcement won't happen this weekend because despite all the tough talk, Lori Lightfoot has now balked. Nobody who shows up for work this weekend will be sent home immediately, even if they ignore the mandate, because City Hall is determined to get it right, Lightfoot says. No, not because of the pending political disaster of a crime-ravaged city getting even more ravaged with crime on the watch of a mayor who personally sent the police home. No, that's not why. She just wants to make sure that she vets everybody extra carefully. And as you might imagine, she says, it's going to take us a little bit of time to make sure we've got information correct. How long will that take? Well, it's not going to be weeks, but it's not going to be this weekend either. In other words, the mandate isn't a mandate, and the deadline isn't a deadline. And for all the claims of fidelity to the science and keeping the city safe from the virus, none of those things changed. Only political considerations did. When the science and Lori Lightfoot's political welfare come into conflict, it is very clear which one is actually the priority. Lightfoot says that she has a contingency plan if things get worse, and that's in part to bring in the Illinois National Guard to help police the city. She'll pull the Kathy Hochul move from New York of just filling frontline hero vacancies that she created herself with National Guardsmen instead. But to call that a Band-Aid solution would be giving it too much credit. It's like cutting off your foot to replace your severed hand. One problem is solved poorly, and another problem is created. Whenever you hear of these National Guard deployments to address critical labor shortages, remember, these National Guardsmen work civilian day jobs. They are teachers. They are healthcare workers. They are police officers. And so pulling them from those roles in their communities means creating similar frontline hero job absences just elsewhere. Sure, you may have more temporary cops in Chicago for the moment, but now you have fewer in Peoria. and Springfield and Bloomington. So that's not a solution. That's just punting the same problem somewhere else. And despite personally creating that problem, Lori Lightfoot insists it's everyone else who is responsible for it. She says these cops who prefer to keep their personal health decisions private are violating their oaths by not showing up for work. But they are showing up for work, and the union president is encouraging them to show up for work. It is you who is threatening to send them home and off the streets.
You will report to work for your Friday tour of duty and be sent home for not being in the portal. That's the plan going forward. You have to show up to work and have the city lieutenant, sergeant, whoever send you home because you are in a no-pay status. But make sure you show up to work.
They all want to uphold their oaths exactly as they swore them. It is you, Lori Lightfoot, who altered the terms of the oath to include not just protecting and serving the citizens of Chicago, but also submitting to the medical dictates of Lori Lightfoot. So just leave the oath alone and watch how all of these cops are right back to upholding it. The mayor and the union are set to battle this out in court. The union is seeking an injunction to stop the mandate. The mayor has filed a complaint against the union, alleging they're engaging in an unlawful strike. But like many episodes in this ongoing national conflict, it won't be settled in court. It'll be settled with the real-life adjudication of what the actual emergency in Chicago really is. Is it a biological virus spreading unstoppably, or is it a criminal virus spreading very stoppably? It's just we choose not to stop it. All I know is if I lived in Chicago, I'd take a gun as a personal protection tool over a mask or a syringe. Find out if that's a wise choice on Lori Lightfoot's personal spin-off of Survivor, airing live this fall. I'm sure they'll put out the fire very soon. It's just the firefighters have also been sent home because exposing the charred corpses to the unvaccinated would, of course, be very irresponsible. We got to keep this burning city safe, after all. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Gab, that is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it.